Yo, what is up guys, Grim here. So this video is going to be a bit of a follow-up video to not last one but the one before that I did, where I had a bunch of data on both tier 11, 13 and tier 6 maps in terms of blighted kind of tendrils, oil drops and all that kind of stuff. So I've gone ahead and I've tested tier 14, 15 and 16 now, and I have the results, and I've also done additional analysis of that to kind of glean a little bit more information. So in terms of the actual oils themselves though, I have now gotten every single oil that is gettable in the game by myself, and an absolute truckload of blighted maps, all self-farmed as well. So I've gotten the golden and I've gotten the silver, and both of these came from tier 16 maps. So I guess that's not too helpful because we'd assume that they dropped there anyway, but that is there nonetheless. I did get both of them within 100 maps of doing tier 16s, so pretty interesting there. So what we're going to do is dive straight into the information. I'm going to run you through my results, and we're going to talk about what we think is the most optimal map to run for the blight encounters. So let's jump into it. Obviously we covered tier 6, 11 and 13 last video, and we're going to be looking at 14, 15 and 16, but there's a bit more stuff that I realized when running the blight encounters about the mechanic in general. So overall I added a few extra kind of things here. I added the total blight chests, which I wasn't gathering for the first tier 6 test, but I did gather subsequently. I also added in a map drop chance column, as well as maps run, obviously a minimum tendrils, maximum tendrils, and we'll talk about the max chests at the end here. So quite a lot more information here instead of what we had before, and obviously I'll make all this stuff available to you guys in the description. So to begin with though, the total blighted chests. You can see here that it does fluctuate. Obviously I did 100 of each of these maps, and then I only did 40 of these, just because, I mean, I was running so many of these maps that I just wanted to kind of try and keep things small, and I felt 40 was a good enough chance to kind of like get to know what was going on in there without having to run 100 of every tier. So that's like why that's there, and that's why it's like that. But anyway, we run a ton of maps, and we're able to actually calculate the drop chance of the blighted maps based on how many blighted chests we got. So you can see here in tier 11 we got 31 blighted chests in 100 maps. In tier 13 we got 46 in 100, and then in tier 16 we got 51 in 100. So it's going up obviously as you get into the higher tiers. I think that may just be because you're obviously getting more chests in the higher tiers, so obviously that would also increase. Now what's really interesting here is how many blighted maps drop in general. So you can actually see here like how many blighted maps obviously drop. I got 7 in this test here, and we can obviously then calculate what the percentage chance was to drop from one of those blighted chests. And you can see it's kind of all over the place, but the map tests that I got 100 results for are a little bit more similar, with the T16 one actually running quite low, but these other ones being fairly consistent. So it's a bit interesting. Obviously this is not reliable data because it doesn't really have any concrete pattern here, but you can see that it's not incredibly rare like some people were saying. It's about a 1 in 10 at worst, and more like a 1 in 5 chance at getting it from a blighted chest, which when you need to run tons and tons and tons of maps to see these consistently, I can understand might be a little bit frustrating, but at the end of the day there will be a lot of these in the economy if people actually do run the mechanic, which unfortunately they're not currently doing because it's not seen as like a very favorable mechanic by the community currently. So yeah, that's the stats on blighted maps. Feel free to peruse the information yourself, but I think it's pretty interesting. So the thing which really caught my attention is getting to know the minimum and maximum tendrils for each tier. You can see here that it actually goes up and up, and then up and up and up as similarly. While there's not much change on the minimum amount of tendrils, there's actually quite a big shift on the maximum amount of tendrils. What I also noticed though is in this data there are a few outliers where for some reason there's just a ton more tendrils than there should be in one map out of 100 in a certain tier. That happened in tier 6, and that was the only time it happened. I'm not sure if that maybe is like a little bit of a bug or something like that, but that's how it is. But I just discounted that because I felt like it was an outlier. So you can see here, minimum tendrils for tier 6 to 11 was 4 out of 100 maps. I only ever got a minimum of 4. for 13 and 14, big enough sample size to tell all of these really that the minimum is 5. So you're going to be getting 5 a lot of the time. And you'll see that these do shift around in terms of how many of each you're going to be getting as you go up the tiers. The higher you go, the less frequently you'll be getting the lower number, and more frequently you'll be getting a higher number. So in terms of the max tendrils though, we also do see that increasing here, especially with the T16 and 15s. I got a lot of 8 tendril kind of encounters, whereas I got no 8 tendril encounters in the 13s and 14s, which is definitely very interesting because you're basically cutting yourself out from having those big, juicy, crazy encounters. So yeah, definitely an interesting progression there, and you can actually, if you jump in, see that progression. So let's say we're looking at 7s, which I think I said started around 13s. So yeah, let's type in 7 here. So you can see here we got like how common 7s are in this massive data set here, and then when you jump over here, you can start to see it's a little bit more common. In general, it'll be a little bit more common there, and then finally once you get to the T16 area, it starts getting to 7s and 8s, and that's where you start getting a lot more tendrils. If I type in 7 and 8, you can kind of see there's a lot more in terms of high quantity encounters, which is definitely both a good and bad thing. So basically you're looking to do T16s for maximum rewards. Now there is actually another thing to consider though, because this isn't always the case. Sometimes you'll get encounters which have 3 tendrils with a bunch of ×2 on them. Sometimes you'll have 4 tendrils with a bunch of ×2 on them as well. But what I noticed is this most likely is just some sort of part of the artificial intelligence which spawns these things. So basically, even with the 3x3, that would still equal 6, and it would still obey the minimum and maximum tendrils for that tier. So it never went over or under. Now, the one thing that I noticed actually does change the maximum minimum is when a boss is involved, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So if you can look here, let's try and find an 8-noder with a boss. Do we have any? They might be in T16s. Let's see. Looks like I didn't get any. Here's a boss encounter. So here we can see I had an 8-noder with a boss leading to 9 total rewards. And the reason for that is because every time a boss spawns, it actually ×2s that lane, which is pretty interesting. So when a boss spawns, you're going to get an extra chest of loot. So what this actually allows you to do is kind of bypass the limit of the kind of encounters, like the tiers, like kind of boundaries, if you know what I mean. So through RNG, you could end up with an insane encounter in like a T6 map if all of them were all bosses, for example, etc., which is pretty interesting in my opinion. So yeah, that's the information in terms of that. If we're actually looking at something that we can learn from this, obviously we can also take a look at the average oils, which you can see here. Obviously we see this going up, and then we got a few interesting points here. I think in general this should all hover around the 6-ish point on average, but just because of the way averages work and because I only have 100 in each data set and sometimes less than that, obviously it didn't hit that 6 point all the time. But I imagine if you actually ran 10,000 of these, it would be 66666 on average. So there's that. And that's also similar kind of case with the total chests. Obviously you can see it kind of going up, and then down. So it's kind of funny that it does that, but I would imagine it's just because I got unlucky on the total quantity of chests in my T16 run, or I got really lucky in my T15 run. But you can see that it does progress upwards slowly, and it's all in line with that kind of thing. So as you get into more difficult content, as expected, you get more and more rewards, which is pretty interesting in my opinion. So yeah, the most optimal tier to do for the Castier events is of course T16. You're going to be getting probably a similar amount of oils as you do with the T13, but you'll be getting more chests, which is very, very good. And it seems like just by this information here, you'll actually be getting like more total blighted chests, but that could be completely RNG. So one other point I wanted to mention here is, as I was continuing to go up to the tiers and all that kind of stuff and test them, this is completely anecdotal, but I did notice that I was getting more and more valuable oils on average. So I was getting a lot of violet and crimsons in T16, whereas I wasn't getting a lot of violet and crimsons in T13s. I was getting more azuras. So it definitely does feel like I get more expensive oils in the higher tiers more frequently. So that's again another point to T16s. So with all this information out there, we can now understand the best tier to run is, of course, the Mega, the Ultra, the T16 map. So that is what I'll be doing my 100 profitability test on, and I've already gotten started preparing for that, and that will be the next video. But now we can understand how the kind of league scales, like what the drop chance of all this kind of stuff is, and hopefully you guys have found this video interesting, and I'll see you guys in the next one. It should be a pretty good one, and maybe I'll also catch you guys on stream. So until then, see you guys in the next one. Cheers.